What is up, guys? Eric here from Real Film Reviews, bringing you another movie review, this time for the new Brie Larson film, Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, stars Brie Larson, Samuel L. Jackson, and Ben Mendelsohn. It is the last piece of the Marvel puzzle before we walk into Avengers Endgame at the end of April. In this film, we follow a Kree warrior known as Vers, who goes on a mission that eventually ends up with her landing on Earth and having to find a way back. But upon landing on Earth, she realizes that the memory that she has lost, that she doesn't have anymore, is slowly coming back as she interacts with different people and different things on this planet, and realizes that maybe it's part of her past as she's being hunted by these enemies. The first thing about this film that really impressed me was the hand-to-hand combat in it, and mostly just the action overall. I think the hand-to-hand combat was very well choreographed, it was entertaining to watch, and it was clear that all of the actors were very well trained for it, which always helps because it doesn't feel like I'm watching a fake hand-to-hand combat scene. It feels like these people are actually ingrained in what they're doing, and I thought that that was very good. However, it moves away from that as the film moves on because Captain Marvel as a character is obviously a very flashy, power-heavy character that uses a lot of different abilities. But even in those sequences, while the trailers had me very worried for the CGI in this film, it actually ended up being completely fine. There was no CGI in the movie that was like horrendously bad or anything. Everything looked good, and her powers are very cool to see on screen in full display. The performances in the film were all decent. No one particularly, except for one person, I think really blew me out of the water. But the one person who I think is just fantastic in this movie is Ben Mendelsohn. I actually can't tell you who he plays in the film because I think I would be spoiling something if I did, so I'm just not going to mention it. But all I will say is, I think with all certainty that Ben Mendelsohn's character in this film is the best supporting character in any solo Marvel film to this day. I don't think there is a side character that is better than him in any solo Marvel film. He is absolutely fantastic in this film, and I loved every single scene that he was in. The music in the movie matched all the scenes that they put it in. It made it very fun because the film takes place during the 90s, so it very much leaned into that 90s nostalgia throughout the movie. It didn't just force it down our throats by putting it in like every single scene on Earth, which was nice, but when it did show up, they made sure it was a very entertaining and fun moment to include it. It got you a laugh, or it made us all go, oh man, I remember that crazy thing from the 90s, and I think that that was a good way to do it. Don't force it on anyone, don't constantly mention that it's the 90s because it's something so many people alive today are so nostalgic about. Instead, just put little references to it throughout the film because it's a fun way to get a laugh, and it's also a good way to remind us that this movie doesn't take place in present day. And then something that actually surprised me was that the film it's pretty funny. Most Marvel movies are funny, but specifically Nick Fury in the movie, Samuel L. Jackson's character, was very funny in the film. He's probably the funniest character in the whole movie, and it's really cool to see a character that we're so familiar with from the MCU, someone who's been in every single Marvel movie since God knows when in the MCU, pretty much. I mean, he was in Iron Man 1, so he's clearly a very, very important character, and it's cool to see him back, only even if it's just like 20, 30 years in the Marvel universe, you know, to see the way that he's changed over time, the way that in this film he's a much more jokey, lighthearted guy, and even though he does crack jokes in the later films, in this movie, he is a much more just overall fun character, and I thought that that was really cool that we got to see how he actually evolved over the years in his role with S.H.I.E.L.D. And then before I get into what I didn't like about the film, I do want to say that I think the plot of this movie worked as well as it could. I've heard from many people that Captain Marvel's origin story is extremely convoluted and weird. I'm not a big Captain Marvel person. I knew little to nothing about Captain Marvel going into this movie. So the fact that actual comic fans of Captain Marvel have told me that makes me feel that I'm not going to bash on the plot of this film too much, because I do think once it gets its footing, it's very good, but I do have some issues with it. And I really only have two issues with the movie as a whole, and the first is the way that the first act of the plot goes. I think that the beginning of this movie is very choppy, it's very jumbled and clunky. It doesn't really feel like it knows where it's trying to go. It's just jumping around to all of these different things that involve Brie Larson's character, and we're just trying to learn as much as we can in these first 30-40 minutes, but it is almost impossible to obtain anything from it. In terms of what we know from previous MCU films, we can pull very little from the beginning of this film, and the film chooses to not really tell us anything. I realize that part of the plot of the film is that Brie Larson's character doesn't have her memory, but from her time living with the Kree, who's who she's living with, she has very clearly become, accustomed to the way they live their lives and what they do as a society. But the film chooses to only show us a couple snippets of that, and we're supposed to just understand everything about this society from that. And it's extremely difficult to say that that works because it really doesn't. I think the beginning of this movie was extremely weak, but it does find its footing about 30-45 minutes in, and when it does, it becomes a very enjoyable, well-made origin story. And then my other issue is again related to the script, and it really just goes directly into the previous issue, and it's about the character development. Normally in a film, especially in an origin story, you spend the first act of that movie giving us a lot of character development so we can become attached to who we are watching and care about them by the end of the film. The problem is, in the plot of this film, her character has lost her memory. So instead of building who she is, sans memory, her memory is gone, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be given more than just a couple lines of exposition about what she's like in a fight in the beginning of the film. I really felt like they left out so much character development in the beginning, and it dragged the end of the movie down, because when the first act ends, we still don't know very much about this character. We know about Nick Fury because of what we know in the past, but we still don't know very much about Captain Marvel. And then at the end of the film, they're trying to cram in all of this character development, but by the end of it, I never really felt very attached to her character. It's not Brie Larson's fault. I think she did a solid job with what she was given. I just think the script should have focused more on building her as a person. Even if she didn't know where she came from, who she is now would have been nice to learn about before the film started to go into the massive plot that it goes into, because it made it so when all the big action stuff and craziness was going on, it was hard for me to really care about her because I felt like I didn't really know her or have any attachment to her. I'm gonna give Captain Marvel a B-. I think that this is a perfectly acceptable MCU origin story film. Obviously, some origin story movies are better and some are definitely worse. I just felt like it was really across the board perfectly fine. There was nothing about it that blew me away. I think that they should have tweaked the script a little bit to make it a little more consistent throughout. But overall, it was an enjoyable ride and I was thoroughly entertained for the 2 hours that I was in the theater. If you like superhero movies, definitely go watch Captain Marvel because I think you'll have fun. Well guys, as always, I'm Eric. If you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe, comment down below what you thought of Captain Marvel, share everything we do here on Real Film Reviews, and I hope to see you guys later.